There are places in the world that were once packed with people and teemed with non-stop daily activities, and then, from one reason to another, they suddenly turned into cold and abandoned places. Today, from the abandoned ruins, war-stricken zones to the darkest and creepiest islands, Curious Panda will present to you the eeriest abandoned places around the world. But first, extend me your love by hitting the subscribe button. That said, let's start with number 1. The creepy Gullivers Travel Park. The Gullivers Travel Park in Kawaguchi region of Japan was opened in 1997, based on the novel Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. The park features a giant model of a noble main character, Lemuel Gulliver, who was tied to the ground at the center of the park. Everything seems fine about this park: the rides, the attraction, and the mesmerizing view of Mount Fuji, except for some tiny details. The park was built in Kamikoishiki village, at the foot of Mount Fuji, near Okigahara, the famous suicide forest in Japan. And what's more creepy, it was the former base camp of the religious cult Om Shinrikyo, the destructive cult responsible for 13 deaths in the Tokyo sarin nerve gas attack in 1995. After 4 years of attempts to dispel the site's negative image as the creepy cult's base, the theme park was permanently shut down in October 2001. Eventually, the park was gradually taken over by nature and the facilities were left vandalized. Number 2. The Toxic Ghost Town of Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia, Pennsylvania used to be a busy small town filled with shops and mining business with its over 1,000 residents working and living as a tight-knit neighbors. What was eerie was beneath this town, there is a fire that has been burning deep down in the mines since 1962. The fire was so bad that it opened up a sinkhole in a resident's backyard. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy fell into the hole, which had a hot steam rising from it and contained a deadly volume of carbon monoxide. Though the boy was saved, the incident caused a major panic within the town. Eventually, as a result of the mining decline, the number of residents in this town decreased from around 1,000 in 1980 to just 7 in 2013. And 30 years later, the state declared Centralia condemned. Now the streets are abandoned, most of its buildings are gone, and the smoke keeps on rising from the vandalized highways where the rich town once stood. Number 3. The Most Haunted Islands, Fubilia Island, Italy. Fubilia Island rests on the Venetian lagoon of Italy and was dubbed as the Island of Ghosts due to its dark past. The island became a quarantine colony for plague victims under the rule of Napoleon Bonaparte. Local legend has it that people were dragged to the islands if they showed the slight symptoms of the Black Death. The 7-hectare plot was also used as a mass burial ground, where about 160,000 victims are thought to have been cremated to stop the spread of the disease. It has been believed that even to this day, human ash makes up more than 50% of the island's soil. In the late 1800s, mentally ill patients were made to reside in an asylum in Fubilia. The asylum later turned out to be a place of exile rather than rehabilitation. There were even rumors that in 1930s, a doctor performed strange human experiments on the patients. Recently, some construction crews tried to restore the former hospital building, but they abruptly stopped without explanation, creating more speculations among locals that they were driven away by the island's dark forces. Number 4. The Mirny Diamond Mine of Eastern Siberia. The Mir mine was a massive open-pit diamond mine in Mirny, Russia. It is one of the largest man-made holes on Earth and one of the richest diamond-bearing deposits in the world. It is over 525 meters deep, making it the 4th deepest in the world, and has a diameter of around 1,200 meters, making it the 2nd largest hole in the world after Bingham Canyon Mine. The mining operation began in 1957, and during its peak years, the mine produced 10 million carats of diamond per year. But now, it's just another creepy and abandoned place. In 2004, the mine was closed for good, Officials stated that there was a flood and that they had gone too deep to mine any farther, but some conspiracy theories and diamond dealers floated around, some claiming that the pit can suck helicopters from the air. But to date, there have been no confirmed accidents of this kind. Number 5. The Rugyong Hotel of North Korea. In 1987, the construction of a brand new hotel started in North Korea's capital, Pyongyang. The Rugyong Hotel. The pyramid-shaped, super tall skyscrapers exceed 1,000 feet in height and was designed to house at least 3,000 rooms as well as 5 revolving restaurants with panoramic views. It was supposed to open 2 years later, but it never did. It was later dubbed as one of the world's creepiest abandoned places and the tallest unoccupied building in the world by the Guinness Book of World Records. The construction work has been started and stopped many times. That in 1992, the hotel stood a naked concrete, windowless and hollow for the next 16 years, towering other buildings around it, earning itself a nickname, Hotel of Doom. The hotel was later clad with metals and glass and was later fitted with LED lights to turn it into a colorful nighttime spectacle. Number 6. Pripyat, the Chernobyl abandoned city. Pripyat was founded as a nuclear city in the Soviet Union in 1970, purposely to house the employees of the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant, including the city builders. It was officially recognized as a city in 1979, with a population of over 49,000. On the night of April 26, 1986, the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded. But in the early hours of the following morning, people went about their usual business, unaware of what happened, until within few more hours of the explosion, dozens of people started to get ill. So on April 27, the evacuation started. To speed up the evacuation, people were told to bring only what is necessary. As a result, many personal belongings were left behind and stayed in there until now. Among the abandoned things, the most iconic reminder of the disaster is the rusting Ferris wheel in an amusement park that was due to open just days after the accident took place, and now it just stood eerily in the area. Number 7. The abandoned Hotel de Salto. Hotel de Salto was initially a residential mansion home of a well-to-do French architect named Carlos Arturo Tapias, until in 1928, the hotel finally opened its door to tourists. Unfortunately, as pollution took over the Bogota River in the early 1990s and reports of foul-smelling odor coming from the heavily contaminated waters, the traveling tourists start to lose their interest in visiting the hotel, and it was eventually closed in the early 1990s. Tragically, the hotel became a site of several suicide incidents, and the fact that many people in the past have chosen the spot to commit suicide has made many locals believe that the hotel was haunted. The building has since become a museum which celebrates the country's heritage and environment. Number 8. Forlandia, Brazil. In 1920s, U.S. industrialist Henry Ford built a city in the Amazon forest in Brazil to produce cheaper rubber materials. It was a place that Ford hopes to live on the values that made his company successful. The city was surrounded with every kind of amenities as he envisioned to build a community of 10,000 workers who could enjoy the high standard like the Americans had, at the same time producing rubber for Henry Ford's factories at home. All this were supposed to be a part of Ford's idea of a utopian city. But then, things went bad. Workers acquired yellow fever and malaria. Transport was only possible by the nearby river because there were no available roads. Managers who barely knew about tropical farming wrongfully planted crops only to be destroyed by disease and insects. And worse, local workers were forced to eat unfamiliar American food and then live in an American-style housing. They hated the arrangement that riots eventually broke out after just few years. By 1945, synthetic rubber had been developed, reducing the demand for natural rubber. So Ford's investment opportunity dried up overnight without producing any rubber for Henry Ford's tire. As for the locals, ever hoping that Henry Ford would someday visit their town in the middle of the jungle, but Ford never did, so many residents eventually gave up and left. Number 9. Winchester Mystery House of California, USA. This mansion in California was famous today as the Winchester Mystery House. It features a maze of dead ends, secret doorways, and stairs that leads to nowhere. But before, it was simply Sarah Winchester's house. Sarah Winchester grew up in a privileged life until tragedy befalls her following her daughter Annie's sudden death and her husband, the gun magnate William Winchester, more than a decade later. Struggling with her loss and not knowing what to do with the massive fortune left to her, Sarah sought the advice of a medium. As the story goes, the medium was said to channel her dearly departed William and advise her to leave her home in Connecticut and head to California, and she was to use the fortune to build a home for the spirits of those who had fallen victim to Winchester rifles, lest she will be haunted by them for the rest of her life. Driven by paranoia and superstition, Sarah ordered the construction should never cease until her death. The residence mushroomed to as high as 7 stories. Although it was damaged in the 1906 earthquake, the house is still open to visitors who can explore the 160 surviving rooms. Number 10. The Island of Dolls. The story about the Island of the Dolls is rather bizarre. Over 50 years ago, a man named Don Julian Santana Barrera left his wife and child and moved onto the island on Tishulu Lake in the Xochimilco canals. It was said that after finding a dead girl's body in the nearby canal, Barrera began collecting and displaying toys in the hopes of warding off evil spirits. While no one knows whether a young girl actually drowned in that lake or Don Julian merely imagined the drowned girl as some of his relatives says, Don Julian devoted his life bizarrely honoring this lost soul. He collected and hung up dolls by the hundreds. Eventually, Don Julian transformed the entire island into a horrifying doll-infested wonderland. After 50 years of collecting dolls and hanging them on the island, Don Julian was eventually found dead, drowned in the same spot where the girl was said to have drowned. Today, more rowers are willing to transport people to the island, but some simply refuse due to some superstitions. Number 11. Varosha, Cyprus. In the early 1970s, Famagusta was a famous beach destination in Cyprus. With so many tourists, the resort soon built a wide selection of restaurants, luxury hotels, and entertainment venues. However, on July 20, 1974, when Turkish invaded the city, all residents and tourists were forced to leave Famagusta due to a Turkish invasion, and Varosha's popularity came to end. Most of the inhabitants fled, believing it to be the temporary measure to avoid further casualties. But following the invasion, Varosha was closed and closely guarded by the Turkish army, and people today can only peep through the barbed wire as nature started reclaiming the buildings. Turkish authorities announced a partial reopening of the abandoned town for potential resettlement, drawing a strong opposition from Greek, Cypriot, and international leaders. Number 12. St. George Church of Czech Republic. In the small town of Lukova of the Czech Republic, there is a church that has stood for hundreds of years. This is the abandoned St. George Church. This church was abandoned when its roof collapsed while a funeral service was being conducted in 1968. Taking it as a bad omen, the residents left the church to rot and opted to hold the religious services outside the church instead. Later, some members of the communists looted the valuable objects that were inside. To raise funds for the restoration of the church, artist Jacob Hadrava was commissioned to turn it into an art installation, and the church has recently become a home to some ghostly shrouded statues in 2014 and has become a minor tourist attraction. Number 13. The abandoned Soviet submarine base. Known as Secret Object Number 6, the incomplete submarine shelter Falubsky was abandoned on the coast of Peter the Great Bay in the Primary region of Russia. The submarine base was thought to have been built as a nuclear bunker to protect the Soviet Union's nuclear submarines. The base features two large tunnels to house submarines with a much smaller maze for personnel. The tunnels were constructed in the 1960s. However, the construction slowed until it was left unfinished. It has remained untouched since it was abandoned, and it remains intact and could likely be revived if needed. Today, it remains abandoned and can still be found with frozen water in the submarine docking areas. Number 14. Six Flags of New Orleans. This theme park once resounded with children's laughter until destroyed by Hurricane Katrina in August 2005. Murky water elevated as high as 6 feet, damaging 80% of the rides. After the storm, the parking was left standing in 4 to 7 feet of water, and soon as the water receded, what was left of the amusement park was a wasteland. The disaster left it too expensive to restore, and since then, the park has been abandoned for almost 16 years, except for some urban explorers, slithering snakes, and lurking alligators. For so long a time, the sign still reads, "Close for storm." And what's left behind is the eerie version of the old theme park and a sordid remembrance of the vibrant city that was once struck by tragedy. Number 15. Oradour-sur-Glane, France. Oradour-sur-Glane was a small farming village which was located in the German-occupied zone of France during World War II. On June 10, 1944, the Germans killed virtually everyone in sight. They massacred 642 people, almost the entire population, and then destroyed the village. The Nazi soldiers rounded up the entire population, concentrated them on the market square, and separated them by gender. They locked down 197 men in several barns in the town. Women and children were locked up in the village church. They set fire to the barns. They threw grenades through the windows of the church, shooting those who tried to escape. And now, only the ashy rubble and the fragments of the structure remain. The town was purposely left alone by the French government as a testimony to the Nazis' atrocity during the World War II to the village. And last but not the least, number 16, the Presidio Modelo prison. The Presidio Modelo prison in Cuba was empty since 1967. However, it still radiates the sense of desperation and paranoia. It was commissioned in 1926 by dictator Gerardo Machado and inspired by the Panopticon model. Its oppressive architecture was designed to create a feeling of constant supervision and invisible monitoring. Fidel Castro was once an inmate here, but despite that, under his government, the prison's population ballooned to over 6,000 enemies of state. The prison was later converted into a museum where visitors can actually experience the atmosphere of oppressive penal system echoing through the corridors and the vacant cells. So there goes the rundown of the eeriest abandoned places around the world. Surely there are far many other places, but we're leaving them to the ever watchful eyes of our curious friends for some research. Finally, thank you for your genuine support to this humble channel.